Hey guys, tonight we slip into the stone corridors of a medieval monastery, where the air smells faintly of smoke and old parchment, and the only light comes from a single wavering flame. You can almost feel the chill seeping through the thick walls, the hush broken only by soft footsteps and the scratching of quills. Imagine yourself in a world where time doesn't tick on a wristwatch or light up on your phone, it drips, slowly, bead by bead, down the side of a candle. And yes, if you had to survive without alarms or Google Calendar, you probably wouldn't make it very long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where and when people are listening in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The flame trembles, and you watch a monk in a heavy robe cup his hands around it, coaxing it to life. The wick sizzles softly before catching, sending a small wave of warmth into the otherwise frozen air. That single candle is more than just light. It's a clock, a guide, and in many ways, a heartbeat for the monastery. Without it, the rhythm of prayers, chants, and work would dissolve into chaos. You picture the monk's face, lit by flickering orange glow, eyes tired but steady. He knows that when the candle burns down to a certain point, it's time to ring the bell for the next prayer. No smartphone notifications, no buzzing alarms, just melting wax and unwavering faith. The monastery around you is quiet, except for the faint creak of wood beams and the whisper of robes brushing across stone. You trail behind as the monk carries the candle into the chapel, setting it carefully where everyone can see. He doesn't need a clock tower. The glowing cylinder of wax does all the work. Of course, you wonder how reliable can dripping wax really be. Historians still argue whether candles ever truly kept time with much accuracy, or whether monks just sort of pretended they did. Like you pretending to know your Wi-Fi password by heart. The truth is, the candle wasn't perfect, but it was practical enough. A candle burns at a fairly steady rate if it's the right size, in the right conditions, with no mischievous draft sneaking through a crack in the wall. That's a lot of ifs, but for monks, it worked. Picture it. Each evening, someone lights a new candle, marked carefully along its length. Every hour, the wax level sinks past another notch or metal peg. When the flame reaches it, a soft clink rings out as the peg falls, signaling time to pray or sing. Ingenious, really. And you thought you were clever for setting your phone alarm 5 minutes early to trick yourself into waking up. But it wasn't just about timekeeping. For these monks, time itself was sacred. Every drop of wax, every puff of smoke was a reminder that life burns away too. Their days were divided into holy hours, matins at midnight, lauds before dawn, vespers at sunset. Without a way to measure time, their devotion would scatter like ashes in the wind. There's something hypnotic about watching wax melt, isn't there? The way it pools and hardens, as if the candle is leaving behind little fossils of its own existence. You imagine monks staring at those drips, pondering not just minutes passing, but mortality itself. To them, a candle wasn't simply practical, it was symbolic. Light represented Christ, the flame represented the soul, and the steady disappearance of wax represented the fragile length of human life. No pressure, right? Still, not everyone agreed candles were the best tool. In some abbeys, water clocks trickled away in stone basins, a different kind of drip marking the hours. In others, monks tried to follow the stars. But when you're inside thick walls during a stormy night, let's be honest, the candle wins. It's portable, warm, and just dramatic enough to make you feel like you're in the middle of a medieval Netflix special. Now, picture yourself trudging down those dark cloisters, the candlelight stretching shadows across the arches. Your footsteps echo on the flagstones, a reminder that you're not really alone. You hear the low hum of distant chanting, monks' voices weaving together in a language you don't quite understand, but that somehow feels timeless. All of this whole rhythm of night and prayer hinges on a fragile piece of burning wax. It's almost funny, isn't it? Whole community is organized around something you could accidentally snuff out with a careless sneeze. You can almost imagine a monk panicking. Brother, did you blow it out again? That was our 2 a.m. alarm. But humor aside, this fragile system worked for centuries, and in the flickering light, you feel how profound it must have been. The candle doesn't just measure hours, it transforms time into something visible, something alive. Each glow is a reminder. The night is moving, the dawn is coming, and life itself is passing drop by drop. You stay close behind that wavering flame, watching how it slides down the shaft of wax, and you realize something. This isn't just about light, it's about precision, well, as precise as you can get when your clock can be eaten by a mouse. The monks knew that a candle of uniform thickness, made from carefully weighed wax, would burn at a fairly steady rate. They experimented with different recipes, mixing tallow from animals with beeswax, noticing how one produced a faster drip and another a steadier flame. You can almost smell a beeswax giving off a faint sweetness. Tallow, on the other hand, smelling like someone forgot to clean the fryer. The idea was simple. Mark the candle, measure its burn, and voila, you've got hours. Some candles were notched with little grooves, others embedded with small nails at intervals. When the wax melted to a certain point, a nail would loosen and drop onto a plate with a tiny clink. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing your alarm clock is basically a nail falling out of gooey wax. Kind of unsettling, kind of genius. Historians still argue whether these candle clocks really worked as well as medieval chroniclers claimed. Some insist the burn rate was too inconsistent to be useful, while others point to detailed monastery schedules that couldn't have existed without some workable system. You picture a group of historians today standing in a lab, earnestly timing a candle like it's the Olympic finals of wax-melting dot. But back in the monastery, the point wasn't to get seconds exact, it was about rhythm. The candles gave structure to prayers, meals, and work. Picture monks chanting the psalms, pausing when the flame sinks to a new marker, then turning to the next hymn. The candle was their silent conductor, guiding a choir that stretched from midnight to dawn. Sometimes candles even doubled as timers for sermons. A preacher might light one at the start of a homily and promise to stop when it burned down to the first mark. Now, did all of them actually honor that rule? Probably not. You've sat through lectures before, you know the type who keeps talking long after the timer runs out. But at least the congregation had a visual excuse to groan when the flame crept past the "please stop" line outside the chapel. Candles marked the work hours in the scriptorium, where monks copied books by hand. You can picture the scratch of quills under candlelight, little puddles of wax dripping dangerously close to priceless parchment. The light was harsh, the room cold, but the steady burn reminded scribes when to pause, stretch, maybe warm their ink so it didn't freeze mid-sentence. Somewhere out there, there's probably a medieval manuscript with a random blot of hardened wax in the margin, a silent timestamp of when Brother Matthew sneezed too hard. The candle was fragile, yes, but there was a certain poetry in it. Think about your phone battery today. You watch the percentage tick down, a reminder of time passing and power running out. For the monks, the candle's shrinking body was the same thing, a visible countdown, reminding them both of discipline and mortality. Every hour, the flame consumed a little more, just as every hour, life consumed a little more of them. Pretty deep stuff for something that could also just melt onto your shoes. And then there were the creative designs. Some candles were crafted in stages. Each portion dyed a different color so monks could see which part of the day or night they were in. Others had symbols carved into the wax, so when the flame reached a certain carving, it was time for a particular prayer. Imagine your candle decorated with little emojis: prayer hands at 3 a.m., bread at lunchtime, sleeping face at dusk. Who says medieval life wasn't intuitive? Even kings and nobles borrowed the practice. Some wealthy courts used ornate candle clocks decorated with gold or silver. There are even records of luxury time candles that burned scented wax, so each passing hour came with a whiff of rose or lavender. You almost have to laugh timekeeping with aromatherapy. Your Fitbit smells like rubber. Theirs smelled like a royal garden. But no matter how fancy or plain, the principle was the same. Wax as a measurement of the fleeting present. It didn't matter if you were a monk, a merchant, or a monarch. If you wanted to keep track of the hours after sunset, a candle was your only friend. Well, unless you trusted your rooster to crow on schedule, which, let's be real, is like relying on your cat not to knock over your water glass at 3 a.m. The more you picture it, the more you realize these candles weren't just gadgets. They were lifelines. In an age when darkness ruled the night, controlling time meant controlling your world. And with each drip, each drop, the monks carved order into chaos. turning flickering wax into the heartbeat of their days. The corridor grows quieter now, the candle's flame swaying as you follow it deeper into the cloister. Outside, the world is still no hum of cars, no glow of street lamps, just pitch-black fields stretching into forever. Inside the monastery, silence is its own kind of music. You hear a faint cough from a distant dormitory, the shuffle of sandals on stone, and then, like the low rumble of a tide, voices begin to rise. The monks gather in the chapel, their robes brushing together as they file into long wooden stalls. The candle is set down in the center, its glow painting their faces in soft gold. The silence lingers for a heartbeat, thick as wool, before one voice begins a chant. Slowly, others join. The sound climbs upward, echoing off vaulted ceilings, each note vibrating through the air like ripples in a pond. Here, in the middle of the night, time isn't just measured, it's sanctified. Each interval marked by the candle corresponds to a prayer hour, the Opus Dei, the work of God. These were carefully divided: matins at midnight, lauds before dawn, prime after sunrise, and so on through the day. The candle may drip silently, but it's the cue for entire choirs to erupt, transforming darkness into structured devotion. Imagine how surreal it must have felt. You're half asleep, it's the dead of night, and suddenly the bell rings because yes, the candle has told the bell ringer it's time, and you're expected to stumble out of your bed, shuffle into the chapel, and start chanting in Latin. Try explaining that to your modern brain, which grumbles when your alarm goes off at 7:30 a.m. Historians still argue whether every monastery actually kept this grueling schedule, or whether some fudged the midnight wake-up call when no one was watching. After all, some abbots were more lenient, while others were strict enough to make sure nobody hit the medieval equivalent of the snooze button. The silence between chants was just as important. Between prayers, monks kept strict quiet, each person wrapped in their own thoughts. You can feel that hush, the kind that's heavy but comforting, as though the air itself is listening. A candle flickers, a wax bead slides down, and everyone knows another invisible hour has slipped away. Quirky detail: some monasteries actually had a designated waker, whose job was to go around at night, nudging groggy monks awake for prayer. Picture a medieval hall monitor with a candle and way too much energy at 2 a.m. You almost wonder if some of those accidental wax strips ended up on a sleeping brother's blanket. Oops, but silence didn't mean lifelessness. The monastery, at night, had its own textures. The low murmur of wind in the rafters, the creak of wood shifting in the cold, the crackle of candle wicks. You imagine yourself there, wrapped in a robe, hands clasped, the rhythm of the chants pulling you into a trance. The glow of the candle, tiny yet steady, becomes the axis around which the whole night spins. There's a deep irony here. By day, time feels loud, you see the sun, you hear tools clanging, animals braying. But by night, when everything else falls silent, time whispers through wax and breath. The monks leaned into that stillness, using it to focus their prayers, their reflections, even their dreams. Of course, not all monks found it so spiritual. Some complained. Yes, even centuries ago, people were whining about lost sleep. Imagine trudging half awake into chapel, your brain mumbling, "Really? We're doing this again?" and then chanting for an hour straight before shuffling back to bed. Relatable, honestly. Still, the silence had its power. Without chatter or distraction, he became acutely aware of small things. The warmth of another monk's shoulder as he stood beside you, the faint scent of beeswax drifting from the candle, the rhythm of your own heartbeat syncing with the chant. Time stretched and folded in strange ways, sometimes crawling, sometimes leaping forward when you blinked, and the candle had already eaten away another section. In that space, silence wasn't empty, it was full of devotion, of patience, of a quiet fight against sleep, full of the understanding that even in the darkest hours, time keeps moving, and so must you. And as the chants finally tapered off, the monks bowed their heads, the candle sputtered softly, and silence returned, thicker than before. You feel it too, like a blanket, settling over the whole building. The candle still burns, though marking the minutes until the next prayer. In that hush, the monastery breathes, its heartbeat steady, its rhythm unbroken, waiting for the next time the flame dips low enough to call the brothers back again. You linger in that heavy hush, watching wax droplets fall like tiny beads of glass, each one catching the candlelight before hardening into stillness. The monks stare at the flame too, but their gaze is more than casual, it's contemplative, almost mathematical. To them, each drip is not only another piece of wax lost, but another piece of life gone. It's the perfect metaphor, a body slowly consumed, shining brightly until nothing remains but smoke. Cheerful, right? But in the monastery, this wasn't morbid, it was motivation. Every monk's day was structured around the idea that time wasn't their own, it belonged to God. The candle wasn't just tracking hours, it was reminding them of mortality. You might look at your phone and panic when the battery drops to 3%, but for these monks, the shrinking candle whispered the same urgency. Do what matters before the flame goes out. There's a fascinating detail here. Medieval texts sometimes describe wax not only as a symbol of time, but as a symbol of the human body itself. The wick was the soul, the flame was divine inspiration, and the melting wax was the slow surrender of flesh. Imagine sitting in silence with that kind of symbolism glowing right in front of you. No wonder their chants sounded like they were reaching out of time itself. Historians still argue whether monks actually thought this deeply every time they lit a candle, or if some of them were just like, yep, another night, another drip. After all, not everyone was a philosopher. Some were just tired guys trying not to nod off before lauds. But the symbolism is too consistent to ignore. The candle's presence in religious art, its central role in rituals, and its practical use all blurred together into a single message. Time is sacred, fragile, and burning fast. You follow one monk as he makes his way back to the dormitory. His sandals slap softly against the cold floor. In his hand he carries a smaller candle, barely more than a stub. Its flame flickers with every draft, and you almost hold your breath, as if your exhale could blow it out. He sets it by his bedside, letting the dim glow keep away the suffocating dark. For him, the drip of wax isn't just telling time, it's a companion through the endless night. Quirky detail. Some monasteries supposedly reused the melted wax, scraping it into lumps and remolding it into fresh candles. Recycling before. It was cool. You picture a medieval wax workshop, brothers pouring scraps into molds while muttering prayers, maybe sneaking in a wax statue or two, just for laughs. Not exactly Home Depot, but practical. Now, imagine living every day with your hours measured so visibly. You wake, you pray, you work, and at each moment, the candle burns down a little more. The monks couldn't ignore time slipping away. It was literally glowing in front of them. Compare that to you scrolling on your phone, losing 2 hours without noticing. At least with a candle, you see your life dripping down the side in molten beads, making denial impossible. And those drops weren't just symbols, they had real consequences. When the wax reached a certain level, the bell rang, meals were served, work was halted, or prayers resumed. The monastery moved like clockwork because the candle demanded it. Miss a drip, and you missed a whole schedule. Imagine explaining to your abbot, "Sorry, I overslept. Brother, candle burned faster than I expected." Yeah, that excuse wouldn't fly. The sense of time dripping away shaped how monks viewed their own lives. Many wrote about the brevity of human existence, describing themselves as wax figures melting before God's gaze. It sounds dramatic, but when you live in silence and ritual, surrounded by candles that vanish a little more each day, you start to believe it. Each bead of wax wasn't just about hours passing, it was about mortality passing. And yet, there's a strange comfort in it too. The monks didn't fear the candle's end. They embraced it. Life was temporary, but purpose was eternal. The flame might die, but the rhythm of prayer, the work of the monastery, and the devotion behind it all continued. That little drip of wax reminded them not of despair, but of duty. You sit with that thought for a moment, watching another bead of wax slide down. It hardens quickly, frozen mid-drip, like a teardrop made of pearl. You imagine monks noticing the same thing centuries ago, their fingers brushing against cooled wax, while reflecting on the fleeting but beautiful shape of a single moment. Time wasn't just counted, it was sculpted, recorded, and left behind in waxy fossils that clung to candlestands and stone floors. Each drip, each soft hiss of melting, was life measured and life lived. And in that awareness, the monastery carried on, night after night, candle after candle, until time itself seemed like a rhythm of glowing flame and falling wax. The waxy teardrops harden, but the monks aren't content to leave things at chance. If the candle is going to be their timekeeper, then it had better behave with some precision. You watch as a few brothers huddle over a workbench in a side chamber, sleeves rolled up, experimenting with their wax creations like medieval lab technicians. It's not quite a chemistry set, no goggles, no lab coats, but it's trial and error all the same. One of the simplest tricks was the nail timer. They'd press small metal pins or nails into the candle at regular intervals. As the flame burned lower, the softened wax would release a nail, which would tumble down with a little clink onto a tray. That clink was their ding, a medieval notification sound. Imagine living in a world where your push notification was literally gravity doing its thing. And let's be honest, a nail falling out of wax is still a less annoying sound than the average alarm tone on your phone. But there were more clever designs to ease. Some candles were cast with carefully measured segments, each dyed a different color, so that as one hue disappeared, the next took over. Think of it like a medieval progress bar, except instead of watching a blue line creep across your screen, you watched green wax give way to red, then yellow, then white, satisfying in its own way, though a lot more flammable. Quirky fact: in China, candle clocks sometimes had threads or weights embedded in them, so that when the wax melted past a certain point, the object would drop or shift. In Japan, incense sticks served the same purpose. The length of burned incense marked time, and sometimes scents were layered, so each hour smelled different. Meanwhile, in European monasteries, the smell was, let's just say, less lavender, spa, and more barnyard tallow. Historians still argue whether monks invented all these tricks themselves, or borrowed ideas from older traditions in Asia and the Middle East. It's entirely possible that bits of knowledge traveled along trade routes, drifting from Baghdad to Paris as easily as silken spices. What's clear is that monks didn't just stick with plain old lumps of wax. They tinkered, refined, and found ways to keep their clocks from being totally at the mercy of drafts, mice, and impatient yawns. You trail behind as one monk sets up a particularly tall candle. He scratches lines into the wax, careful to space them evenly. To him, each notch is a promise. When the flame eats down to this line, the bell will ring, prayers will begin, work will pause. His knife scrapes softly, leaving grooves like a ruler carved into ivory. The candle stands tall, proud, like a sentinel of time. Imagine how reassuring it must have been. In a world where life was full of uncertainties, bad harvests, plagues, unpredictable weather, the candle gave one thing that was steady. Not perfect, not flawless, but steady enough. If you're wondering why monks didn't just invent mechanical clocks sooner, the answer is that they didn't need to. Not yet. Wax was doing the job. And here's something wild. Some accounts describe candles designed to burn backwards. That is, a hollow tube of wax with a flame at the bottom, slowly devouring its way upward. Talk about counterintuitive. Set fire to the floor and let it crawl toward the ceiling. Did it work? Hard to say. Historians aren't convinced, but the idea itself proves how far people were willing to push their waxy inventions. Now picture the daily life, shaped by these designs. In the scriptorium, candles with nails timed breaks, so scribes could rest their cramped fingers. In the refectory, tall colored candles told when the meal was finished. No lingering with extra bread, because blue had already melted into red. Even outside, when monks traveled, smaller, portable time candles could be lit to track hours on the road. Imagine carrying a flaming clock in your saddlebag. Safer than texting while driving, sure, but not without its risks. The extended beyond monasteries. Merchants in towns sometimes used candle clocks to time business meetings. Court officials used them for trials, and households used them to limit how long servants burned light in the evening. One candle after supper was an actual rule. In some homes, you complain when your parents tell you to turn off the Wi-Fi. These kids were told to stop reading because the wax was running out. The ingenuity also revealed something deeper, the human obsession with control. The monks weren't satisfied to let night stretch endlessly. They wanted it chopped into pieces, measured, organized, sanctified. And so they embedded nails, carved notches, and dyed wax in stripe-staining acts of rebellion against the chaos of time. You watch one last experiment, a candle with a bell tied to a string, the string looped around the wax. As the candle melts, the string loosens, and the bell rings. The monk smiles faintly, as if proud of his hack. He probably doesn't realize that centuries later, someone will look at his invention and think, so basically, he made the world's First, snooze alarm. The ingenuity flickers on, glowing through the waxed nails, colors, and designs etched drip, not only marking time but showing the restless creativity of people determined to measure the unmeasurable. The clever candles burn lower, but their reach doesn't stay confined within monastery walls. You step outside with the monks, into the small village clustered around their cloister, and you notice how that same flickering logic of wax has begun to shape lives beyond prayer. The monastery isn't just a spiritual center, it's a timekeeper for everyone around it. Picture a market square, muddy and bustling with voices, where merchants arrange their stalls beneath the shadow of the abbey. They know when to open shop, when to pack up, and even when to haggle prices because the monks' bells rung, according to candle drips tell them the hour. Imagine trying to argue over the price of fish while hearing the bell toll for noon prayers. You'd probably cave just to get the deal done before the brothers started chanting again. The influence stretches further. Travelers passing along muddy roads use the tolling bells, powered by the quiet drip of wax, as markers of distance. 3 bells past, dawn becomes a unit of time. Farmers rely on the rhythm to sinking, planting, harvesting, and meals. With the monastery's schedule, it's like the medieval version of syncing your smartwatch to the cloud. Except the cloud is actual incense smoke rising above the chapel roof. And then there's the quirky bit. In some towns, inns used candle clocks to time how long a guest could stay in a rented bed. The innkeeper would light a candle at check-in, and when it burned down to a mark, that was at checkout time. No late fees, no keycards, just a blob of melted wax telling you to get up. Imagine trying that at a modern hotel. Sorry sir, your candle's out. Please vacate. Not exactly 5-star service, but efficient. Historians still argue whether monasteries invented this wider influence intentionally, or whether it spread by accident, like gossip traveling faster than pigeons. Some believe abbeys wanted to control not only their monks' time but their neighbors too, because ordering the hours of peasants meant more orderly villages. Others argue it was more organic. People simply leaned on the only reliable timekeepers around. Either way, the candle's quiet authority seeped beyond stone walls, glowing in homes, courts, and taverns. Follow the candlelight into a craftsman's workshop. A smith hammers away at glowing iron, glancing now and then at a stub of wax by his bench. He knows that when it melts past a notch, it's time to rest the forge, cool the tools, and grab a quick bite. No hourglass, no stopwatch, just a shrinking candle doing its job. You can almost feel the heat of the forge mixing with the honey scent of beeswax. 2 fires burning side by side. Even festivals drew from this waxy wisdom. At fairs or feasts, candles timed games, competitions, or public speeches. Picture a performer juggling torches until the candle burned to a mark, crowds cheering, children pointing at the wax as if the whole event were powered by a flame. It was entertainment on a countdown clock, the medieval equivalent of 5 more minutes until show's over. And of course, the church bells carried the rhythm farthest of all. Every ring tied to candle drips inside the abbey, spread out across fields and forests. You imagine a shepherd, miles away, pausing mid-step as a distant chime reaches him, reminding him of time's passing even though he can't see the candle itself. The abbey becomes a lighthouse of time, its flame invisible but its toll undeniable. Something almost magical about it. How a fragile strip of wax, burning quietly in one corner, can ripple across entire communities. The monks don't just keep time for themselves, they keep it for everyone. Their little wax clock becomes the heartbeat of the countryside. You picture the monastery at night, candle glowing in its chamber, monks chanting softly. Outside, the village sleeps under the same rhythm, confident that someone somewhere is awake, watching the flame, measuring the hours, and ensuring dawn will not arrive unnoticed. And you realize that in a way, the candle became more than just wax and wick. It became authority, order, even comfort. People trusted it, depended on it, and built their days around it. The candle may drip silently, but beyond the cloister, its influence echoes loudly in bells, in schedules, in lives, shaped by its quiet countdown. The bell's echo fades, and you find yourself back inside the cloister, where monks sit in dim corners, whispering to one another. Their voices are hushed, almost conspiratorial, not because they're plotting anything scandalous, but because they're debating something surprisingly mundane. Can a candle really keep time? One monk insists yes, the wax burns steadily enough to divide the night into neat little parcels. He gestures toward the candle like it's a trusted companion. Another shakes his head, pointing out that on stormy nights, drafts make the flame wobble, speeding or slowing its pace. That's not God's timing, he mutters. That's bad architecture. Historians still argue whether these debates were widespread or just recorded in a few eccentric abbeys. Some say monks trusted the candles fully, while others believe they treated them more as rough guides than precision instruments. It's hard to know. No one left behind a medieval candle user's manual, but you can almost hear the debates, whispered like late-night dorm arguments about whose alarm clock is more reliable. One quirky record describes monks accusing each other of deliberately nudging the candles to burn faster, just to shorten long vigils. Was it sabotage? Was Brother Thomas really that desperate for a nap? Hard to say, but you can't deny how human it feels. You've probably done the same with your oven timer, peeking at the cookies and muttering, "Close enough." The debates weren't just practical, though they were philosophical. If a candle dripped faster on a windy night, did that mean God himself was altering the hours? Or did it mean humans were foolish for trusting fire to measure the infinite? It's the kind of question you might roll your eyes at now, but to them, it was serious. Imagine shaping your entire schedule, your prayers, even your sense of mortality, around something that could betray you with a single gust. Some monks defended the candle with fierce loyalty. They argued that its imperfections mirrored human life, unpredictable, fleeting, yet meaningful in its passing. A candle that burned unevenly was no different from a life filled with struggles and interruptions. In a way, the flame's quirks made it even more sacred. Others scoffed. "That's poetic nonsense," they'd say. "We just need to know when Matins starts." You trail along the cloister, hearing snippets of these arguments. One brother leans over, whispering that water clocks are more reliable, steady, dripping through stone basins, immune to drafts. Another counters that water freezes in winter. So what good is that? A third insists the stars are the truest measure of time, but then points out you can't see them when the sky is cloudy. At this point, you can't help but laugh. Basically, it's the medieval version of iPhone versus Android versus Windows. And yet, beneath the sarcasm, the debates reveal something profound. The monks weren't just measuring time, they were wrestling with what time meant. Was it divine and unchangeable, or human and fragile? Was their role to follow time, or to shape it with clever tricks like nails, notches, and colored wax? Every drip was a reminder that time wasn't just practical, it was theological, quirky little detail. Some monasteries even appointed an official timekeeper monk, whose job was to sit with a candle and watch it burn. Imagine being assigned that duty, hours of staring at melting wax, making sure nobody missed their cue. It sounds dull, but you'd probably come out of it with either the patience of a saint or the hallucinations of a sleep-deprived art student. The debates could get heated, but eventually the candle itself ended them. A nail dropped, the bell rang, and everyone shuffled off to prayers, leaving the argument unresolved. The flame didn't care who was right. It just kept burning, melting, marking the night. And maybe that was the lesson. Whether steady or uneven, whether trusted or doubted, the candle forced them to confront the slippery nature of time itself. It was dependable enough to live by, flawed enough to argue over, and symbolic enough to inspire whole philosophies. So, as you sit there, listening to whispers in the shadows, you realize the debates weren't a sign of weakness. They were proof of how deeply humans crave order in the midst of uncertainty. Even in a world lit only by flame, we still argued over whose clock was right. And maybe, centuries later, nothing has really changed. The arguments about the candles still echo in your mind as you wander into another chamber, this one cluttered with curious contraptions. Here, rival timekeepers begin to appear strange, bubbling, ticking, dripping devices, all eager to dethrone the humble Waxandwick method. It feels a bit like stepping into a medieval tech expo, except with more robes and less wi-fi. First, the water clock. You see a large stone basin, carved smooth, with a narrow spout dripping liquid into another bowl below. Each drop represents passing moments, each rising level a silent record of time gone by. Unlike the candle, it doesn't flicker or waver in the draft. But of course, water freezes in winter, and it evaporates in summer, so the monks still found themselves cursing nature's interference. You can almost hear one of them muttering, "A Of course, it's frozen perfect timing, right when I need to know the hour. Then there's the sundial. Outside in the courtyard, a monk points proudly to a carved stone disc marked with careful lines. The shadow of a gnomon creeps across the numbers, telling the hour as the sun arcs overhead. Precise, yes, when the sun is shining. At night, useless. On cloudy days, also useless. Imagine trying to convince a bleary-eyed monk at 2 a.m. that the shadow would be there if only the sun were awake. Quirky fact, some monasteries tried combining methods: a candle inside, a sundial outside, a water clock humming in the corner, backup systems layered like a medieval timekeeping sandwich. But managing them must have been chaotic. Who do you trust when one says midnight, the other says dawn, and the candle just dropped its nail at 3 a.m.? It's like having three friends argue about what time the movie starts, and none of them has the tickets. Historians still argue which method was more influential in pushing Europe toward mechanical clocks. Some claim the candle clock inspired later innovations because of its clever use of marks and weights. Others say water clocks were the true bridge, already used in ancient Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world, with intricate gears and flowing basins. The debate goes on though. If you ask the monks of old, they probably just cared about whatever got them to matins on time. And then, creeping into the scene, you glimpse the earliest experiments with gears. In some monasteries, craftsmen began tinkering with wooden wheels, trying to harness steady motion from water or falling weights. These weren't full mechanical clocks yet, but prototypes, machines that clicked and turned, echoing faintly through stone corridors. You can imagine the curiosity and suspicion they inspired. A machine keeping time, almost magical, or maybe dangerous, depending on which monk you asked. Yet the candle clung on even with rivals emerging. It had its advantages. It was cheap, portable, and doubled as a light source. Why fuss with complicated basins or fragile gears when you could simply light a wick? For all its flaws, the candle clock remained stubbornly practical. You almost admire it, like the old reliable flip phone that somehow outlives every new smartphone upgrade. But the tension grew. As rival timekeepers multiplied, people started to compare. Was the candle fast tonight? Did the water clock lag? Did the stars line up with the flame? These comparisons slowly chipped away at blind faith in wax. The monastery might still hum with chants. The candle still dripped faithfully. But somewhere in the back of a monk's mind was a question. What if there's something better? Quirky little story. There are tales of monks sneaking out to test rival devices under the cover of darkness, as if experimenting with water basins and gears was some kind of forbidden hobby. You imagine them whispering, "Brother, don't tell the abbot I think this wheel might outlast your candle." The medieval equivalent of sneaking a gadget into class. The room around you buzzes with this energy, wax dripping on one side, water dripping on the other, shadows sliding across stone outside, and faint gears turning in the background. Each system has its strengths, its weaknesses, its champions, and its doubters. And in the middle of it all, humanity's obsession with measuring time only grows stronger, because in the end, the rivalry isn't just about accuracy, it's about control. Who gets to define the hours? Who sets the rhythm for prayers, for meals, for markets, for life itself? The candle might glow steadily in its corner, but you can feel the competition heating up. Time is too important to leave to one fragile flame, and soon, that flame will have to share its throne. The gears click faintly in the background, but your ears catch something louder, the toll of bells rolling across the countryside. You step outside into the monastery courtyard, candlelight spilling behind you, and hear the deep, resonant clang, vibrating through the air. It's not just sound, it's authority, carrying across villages, fields, even forests. And the secret behind it, a candle drip inside a dark room. Imagine it. A monk sitting patiently beside the candle, waiting for the wax to burn down to a mark. When it does, a nail falls with that familiar clink. He rises, climbs the narrow stone stairway to the bell tower, and with both hands, pulls the thick rope. The bell shudders, swings, and its voice explodes outward, commanding the ears of everyone. Within miles, that single drip of wax becomes a force that orders entire communities. The bells mark the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers. Each one is a checkpoint in the day, structuring not just the monks' lives but the villagers too. Farmers pause their ploughing when sext rings at midday. Merchants shift prices as Vespers approaches. Even children are hushed when the bell signals nightfall. It's the medieval version of a global time zone update, except powered by one sleepy monk and a piece of wax. Quirky fact, in some towns, people didn't even bother keeping their own time. They simply lived by the monastery. Bells, wakes, weddings, and even court trials began when the bell rings. Want to skip jury duty? Good luck, the candle drip already summoned you. Historians still argue whether the monks fully intended this level of control, or if it grew naturally as villagers leaned on the abbey for order. Some scholars believe the bells were a conscious tool of power, an audible reminder that the church governed not just the soul, but the very rhythm of life. Others think it was more accidental, a practical system that spilled into everyday life. Either way, the result was the same. Wax and bells became inseparable rulers of time. Step into the bell tower with me. The ropes sway like serpents, and above, the massive bronze bell waits, heavy and patient. The monk grips the rope, pulls, and the sound crashes down. Your chest vibrates with each peal, your bones hum, and you realize this isn't just noise, it's a command. The countryside obeys, not because they see the candle, but because they hear its voice in bronze. The bells even became weapons of politics. Lords and peasants alike listened for their tones. Bells announced coronations, battles, plagues, and feasts. A single toll could summon warriors, warn villagers of fire, or call the faithful to fast. All of this, every order, every summons linked back to the quiet drip of wax in a cloistered cell. And then there were the quirky complaints. Records mention villagers groaning when the bells rang too often at night, disturbing their sleep. Imagine trying to explain to your abbot that the locals aren't thrilled about 3 a.m. matins, but it's for God's glory. Yes, Father, but the cows are panicking again. Even sacred timekeeping had its critics. As you watch the monks at work, you see how each role intertwines. The candle burns in silence, the bell ringer waits, the tower trembles with sound, and the village bends to its rhythm. It's like an invisible thread running from wax to rope to bronze to ear. No one questions it, not really. To question time itself would be like questioning the sunrise. Yet you sense the fragility. One draft, one misjudged wick, one tired monk, dozing at his poststand. The bell tolls late, or not at all. Life pauses awkwardly, prayers stumble, markets miss their cues. The entire web depends on something as delicate as melting wax. It's a reminder that even the loudest bells rely on the quietest flames. The last clang fades into the night, leaving your ears ringing. The candle glows faintly in the distance, still dripping, still dictating, still transforming silence into sound. And you realize that while bells might have been the loudest voice in the medieval world, it was always the candle whispering the script behind the curtain. The last bell fades, and you wander deeper into the monastery, this time into the scriptorium, a long, hushed hall where monks sit bent over parchment. Candles flicker beside them, dripping wax onto wooden desks, casting halos of light around. Ink-stained fingers, and here, you notice something intriguing. The candle isn't just keeping time anymore, it's becoming a symbol. Think about it. In a world where people couldn't just glance at their phones, the candle became more than a tool. It became a metaphor for life itself. Wax melting, flame wavering, light shining briefly in darkness, all of it spoke of human existence. To live was to burn down steadily, drip by drip. You probably won't survive this metaphor either, just saying. Some monks even wrote about the candle in their manuscripts, not just as a clock, but as a lesson. Life is like a candle, one note might say. Its flame flickers but gives light until consumed. Heavy stuff for a bedtime story, but true to their mindset and quirky detail. Some illustrations even showed candles with little faces, like medieval emojis of mortality. You picture a wax stick, frowning as it drips, a way kind of sad, kind of hilarious. Meanwhile, in the church, the candle took on liturgical roles. Tall candles burned at altars, symbolizing divine presence. Paschal candles marked Easter, huge and ornate, their slow burning echoing resurrection and eternity. Yet, in the corner of the cloister, the same wax was quietly ticking off hours like a stopwatch. The dual identity is almost comic majestic in ceremony, but also a humble timekeeping tool. Historians still argue whether the symbolic meaning of the candle influenced its practical use, or if it was the other way around. Did monks see the flame as sacred because it kept their prayers on schedule? Or did they start timing prayers by candle because the flame was already holy? It's a chicken and egg puzzle of medieval spirituality. As you linger, you notice how the monks weave the metaphor into daily life. When a novice fumbles, an elder sighs, like wax, you will be shaped. When someone passes away, they say, his flame has gone out. Even bedtime jokes carry the imagery. Brother, don't snore too loud, jewel, blow out our lives. Dark humor, sure, but it shows how deeply the candle permeated their world. There's another quirky twist. In some monasteries, they colored the candles, blue or red, wax stripped differently, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, leading to debates about whether certain colors measured time more accurately. It probably drove some poor abbot mad, watching his monks bicker over whose candle burned holier. And for ordinary villagers, the candle became their link to time as well. When they saw the abbey candle burning during evening prayer, it was reassurance. Life was ordered, God was near, time was cared for. In a world full of uncertainty, storms, famine, warmth, a steady drip of wax was comfort itself. But here's the thing, symbols have power. The candle wasn't just a practical tool. It shaped how people thought about time itself, not as a mechanical force, but as something alive, flickering, mortal, yet meaningful. Every drip wasn't just a second, it was a heartbeat, a reminder that existence itself was fragile and luminous. You sit with one monk who pauses in his copying. He stares at the candle beside him, ink drying on his quill. See, he whispers, the wax dies, but the light remains. You nod, because even if you're half asleep, you feel the weight of it. It's philosophy delivered through melted wax, theology flickering in flame. And so, the candle clock carried more than time, it carried meaning. It wasn't just about when to pray or eat. It was about how to live, how to understand life's brevity, how to see yourself as both wax and flame. And even if you're rolling your eyes at the medieval melodrama, admit if there's something poetic there, even in the drip 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 of melted wax on stone. The candle's glow softens in your mind as you wander from the scriptorium to another hall where the mood shifts. Here, the story isn't about prayer or poetry, it's about money. Yes, that humble dripping candle slowly nudged the medieval world towards something new. The idea of time as currency. Picture it, merchants in a bustling town square, glancing up at the monastery tower, waiting for the bells that were, in turn, dictated by the candle. If the sexth bell rang, it meant midday, and markets adjusted their prices accordingly. Laborers were often paid by the day. But how do you measure a day fairly? Enter the candle. Monks timed prayers. Towns began timing work. The same flame, guiding chants at midnight, started governing wages by morning. Quirky tidbit, in some guilds, candles were literally used as timers for labor. A worker might be told, your shift lasts until this candle burns down. Imagine trying to argue over time when your boss can just point to a lump of wax. No HR department, just wick and wax. Historians still argue whether this transition to time-as-money was intentional or accidental. Some believe the church never meant for sacred clocks to trickle into economics, while others argue it was inevitable once you measure hours for prayer. Those hours quickly start applying to plowing fields and hammering iron. Either way, the candle clock became a quiet accomplice in reshaping medieval economies, and then came contracts. Lawyers and notaries began setting deadlines by the bell, which of course traced back to the candle. If a payment was due at none, you couldn't fudge the hour. Everyone in town heard the bell ring. No more excuses like, sorry, my rooster overslept. The candle bell system created a shared standard, an authority that even courts recognized. You walk past a carpenter shop, its windows lit by stubby candles. Inside, apprentices plane wood while their master glances at a candle clock sitting on the bench. Every drip of wax is a reminder of how long they've been at it, how much progress is owed. It's not just prayer, it's productivity. Suddenly, you realize this is the ancestor of the punch clock, the stopwatch, even that digital timer glaring at you on your microwave dot. And here's a slightly absurd image. A monk, candle in hand, scolding a blacksmith for missing prayer while the blacksmith mutters, well, your candle told me I still had an hour left. The clash between sacred time and working time must have sparked more than one passive-aggressive medieval argument. Of course, not everyone loved the shift. Some villagers resented how time became stricter, less fluid. Where once life flowed, with the sun and seasons. Now it ticked by wax, bells, and obligations. Your nap might be interrupted by a bell. Your market stall closed earlier than you wanted. It was a blessing and a burden. Order at the cost of freedom. The candle, once just a flame, was quietly morphing into a ruler's tool. Control of time meant control of labor, money, and even rest. It's not hard to see why. Centuries later, people would complain about the tyranny of the clock. But here, in its infancy, the candle clock was the first taste of that discipline. Still, there's humor in imagining medieval bosses wielding candles as time cards. You're late, half a candle late, or the worker sneaking a shorter candle onto the bench, hoping the shift ends early. You can't help but chuckle at how universal workplace tricks must have been. As you drift back into the monastery halls, you sense the weight of it all. One drip controls prayer, another drip controls pick. And while the monks may not have set out to monetize the flame, they lit a path that would eventually lead the world into an era where time itself could be bought, sold, and budgeted. The candle burns lower now, but its influence burns higher. They're never no longer just a tool of devotion, but a quiet engine of economy. The wax drips slower now, or maybe you're just noticing the rhythm more carefully. Because here in the monastery library, surrounded by piles of scrolls and parchment, you see something else happening. Curiosity. The candle clock, once a humble invention for keeping monks awake, is beginning to stir a restless desire to measure time more precisely. One monk, sleeves rolled up, squints at a candle with faint scratches carved into its side. He's not just marking hours anymore, he's testing burn rates. Does thicker wax last longer? Does a draft speed things up? He jots notes in the margin of his psalter, like a scientist disguised as a scribe. And there it is. You're witnessing the earliest roots of experimental science flickering in candlelight. Quirky tidbit. Some monks even tried attaching little weights or balls of metal to the wax. As the candle burned, the weights dropped, sometimes rolling onto trays with a clink, the effect an early prototype of the mechanical clock's striking system. Sure, it wasn't always accurate. Sometimes it just startled the poor brother napping nearby, but the idea was genius. Historians still argue whether these experiments truly influenced later clockmakers, or whether the mechanical clock developed independently. Did the curious tinkering of monks with candles directly inspire gears and escapements, or were both simply parallel answers to the same question? How do we trap time? The debate lingers, like smoke curling from a snuffed wick, but there's no denying the vibe. Candles gave birth to measurement fever. Suddenly, time wasn't just a prayer schedule or wage counter, right? It was something to study. Imagine a world without minutes or seconds, and then imagine being the first to think, wait, what if we sliced the day thinner? That's the leap. Candles encouraged. You peer over a monk's shoulder as he doodles strange diagrams, circles, weights, dripping marks. His candle sputters, wax pooling, while his mind chases after invisible hours. He doesn't know it, but he's inching closer to Galileo's pendulum centuries later. 2 atomic clocks today. Wax is just the starting line. And here's a fun mental image. 2 monks arguing over which candle burns truer. One insists beeswax is the gold standard, while the other swears by tallow. Voices rise until the abbot sighs. Brothers, it's midnight, argue tomorrow by candlelight. Medieval nerd fights, powered by dripping wax. Outside the cloister walls, curiosity spreads too. Merchants begin wondering if candles can measure shorter tasks. Alchemists eye them as instruments for timing potions. Doctors experiment with candle cures, claiming certain burn rates could diagnose fevers. Spoiler, they couldn't, unless the patient was just very flammable. Still, the idea that wax could tell you more than the hour was intoxicating. And with every experiment came a subtle shift in worldview. Time wasn't just God's mysterious flow anymore. It was a phenomenon that could be tested, quantified, manipulated. The monks may not have realized it, but their dripping candles were quietly undermining the notion that time was entirely divine. They were handing it over to human minds, human hands, human curiosity. You sit in the library, listening to quills scratching, watching flames flicker, feeling the slow weight of discovery. The monks don't look like rebels, but in their small way, they're pushing boundaries. They're saying, this candle isn't just for prayer, it's for knowledge. And maybe that's the quiet miracle. Out of melted wax came both order and innovation, discipline and curiosity. The candle became a bridge, stretching from devotion to discovery. And on that bridge, humankind took its first careful steps toward science as we know it. The flame dances, steady and small, yet somehow enormous in its impact. And you realize, as your eyes grow heavier, that the candle's greatest gift wasn't keeping monks awake at night. It was keeping human imagination awake, forever chasing the drip of time. The halls grow colder, and the candles shorter, as you shuffle deeper into the monastery story. Somewhere beyond these stone walls, something new is stirring. You hear the faint click of gears, the hush of iron weights swinging, and you realize the candle's reign is beginning to wane. The monks are tinkering with machines. Picture one brother in the corner of the workshop, sleeves rolled, smudges of soot across his face. Instead of carving lines into wax, he's hammering tiny teeth into a wheel of brass. He threads rope around a heavy stone weight, muttering prayers half sincere, half hopeful. Lord, let this contraption tick in your service. The first mechanical escapements are taking shape here, in the same cloisters that once trusted only flame. Quirky tidbit: early gear-driven clocks weren't much more accurate than candle clocks. Some would run too fast on damp days, too slow in the cold, and occasionally break with an ear-splitting clang. Villagers probably learned new vocabulary the first time a tower bell went berserk at 3 in the morning, but compared to a candle that blew out in the wind, the machine felt like the future. Historians still argue whether candle clocks directly inspired mechanical clocks, or if the shift was more symbolic. A psychological leap from time is dripping. A way to time can be harnessed by gears. Some evidence hints that clockmakers borrowed ideas from candle nails dropping with a clink. Others claim the mechanical age would have arrived regardless. The debate burns on. Like the last stubborn wick, you walk into the abbey courtyard. A new tower rises, wooden scaffolds climbing skyward, villagers craning their necks to watch. Inside, a great iron mechanism is hoisted, destined to strike the hours with a hammer. The monks gather below, holding candles not to mark time but to witness its transformation. The flame has guided them here, but the bell will take over. And yet, the candle doesn't vanish overnight. For centuries, both systems coexist. Monks light candles at night, still scratching marks and counting drips, even as daylight hours are commanded by clattering gears. It's like living with two time zones at once: wax time and real time. And yes, there were probably scheduling mishaps. Imagine Brother Thomas explaining, "I was on candle time, not clock time," like some medieval version of blaming traffic. Still, you can feel the inevitability. The machine doesn't flicker, it doesn't melt or crumble. It ticks, relentlessly, hammering hours into everyone's ears. Time is becoming sharper, stricter, less forgiving. The candle, with all its softness and symbolism, starts to look quaint, like a childhood toy left behind. But here's a thought that might soothe you. Without the candle, maybe the machine wouldn't exist. Without monks obsessing over wax strips, nails falling, flames sputtering, maybe no one would have dreamed of trapping time in steel. The candle was the stepping stone, the bridge that let human hands move from fire to gears. So tonight, as you drift in this liminal glow, you stand at the edge of an era, 1 foot in flickering flame, 1 foot in grinding machinery. You hear the bell begin to toll, echoing across fields and villages, announcing that the future has arrived. And yet, in your hand, a simple candle still burns, its quiet drip reminding you that old ways linger, even as the world turns mechanical. The air is hushed now, as though the monastery itself knows the candle is stepping into shadow. You watch the last of the wax puddle in the brass dish, and you realize the flame's greatest legacy isn't just practical, it's symbolic. The candle becomes an icon, a picture burned into the imagination of every storyteller, artist, and dreamer who thinks about the medieval world. You see it everywhere: manuscripts illuminated with tiny monks bent over scrolls, a stub of candle glowing on the desk. Paintings, centuries later, in Renaissance halls, show saints with halos that look suspiciously candle-like, rings of fire tied to light and devotion. The dripping candle becomes shorthand for study, for prayer, for the quiet passage of time. Even today, if you picture a medieval scholar, odds are you've put a candle beside him. That's wax memory at work. Quirky tidbit: sailors, far from cloisters, sometimes carried candle clocks aboard ships. Even though the sea breeze made them wildly unreliable, The idea of flame as timekeeper was so ingrained that they brought it to places where it barely worked. It's a bit like insisting on using dial-up internet on a spaceship it doesn't fit. But nostalgia runs deep. Historians still argue whether the candle's symbolic power outweighed its practical one. Was it truly a useful clock, or did people cling to it mainly as a comforting metaphor for life's fragility? The answer probably lies in the middle. Yes, it told hours, but it also told stories of mortality, devotion, and fleeting chances. In a world where little felt certain, the slow melt of wax gave people something to hold on to, even if only in imagination. As you wander through time's corridors, you spot the candle's shadow flickering into literature. Poets wrote of life as a candle guttering in the wind. Playwrights leaned on wax as a symbol of beauty fading or love burning away. Long after monks stopped counting drips, writers kept the imagery alive. In a way, the candle clock never died. It simply transformed into metaphor. And isn't that legacy even bigger? Because while gears and pendulums eventually replaced the wax as tools, nothing has replaced the candle in art. If you close your eyes right now and think of old time, what do you see? Not a gear, not a sundial. You see a candle. Maybe crooked, maybe half-burned, maybe dripping onto a wooden desk. That's the power of symbol. It outlasts the invention itself. You lean back, listening to the faint toll of bells outside, and realize that the candle is still with you. Here in this story, every image you've conjured tonight, the glow on the stone floor, the wax dripping like beads of memory, proves its survival. It may no longer rule monasteries, but it rules imagination. So you let the thought rest gently. The candle taught monks discipline, merchants punctuality, and humanity, the very idea that time can be measured. But beyond that, it left behind a flame in our minds. And centuries later, when someone sketches a monk in a dim room, the candle is there again, measuring not hours, but the persistence of memory itself. The last corridor stretches before you, quiet and long, like a tunnel carved out of shadow. A single candle flickers at the end, wax running in rivulets, flame bending with each breath of air. You walk slowly toward it, feeling how the story itself is winding down, tapering just as the wick does. The monks are almost gone. Now only a few linger in the cloister, their chants fading like echoes in a seashell. They no longer need the candle to keep their hours, yet they light it anyway. Out of habit, out of reverence, out of memory, the bell tower outside rings with precise, mechanical authority. But in the hush of their chambers, the candle's soft glow still feels more human. Quirky tidbit: some monasteries kept ceremonial candle clocks long after they'd stopped relying on them. Like museum pieces in active use, on feast days, they'd light them as a kind of tribute to their history, watching the wax burn as a symbol of tradition. Think of it as the medieval version of keeping an old phone you never turn on, but still can't throw away. Historians still argue whether the very last candle clock ever used ceremonially was extinguished in the 16th or 17th century. Records mention stubborn abbots who insisted on wax time long after the rest of Europe had moved on. The exact moment the practice ended is lost to history, but maybe that's fitting. After all, candles don't leave sharp endings. They fade, they drip, they vanish slowly. You stand in that final glow, watching the wax pool, and you feel the centuries folding into one another. A flicker here, a drop there, monks measuring the night, merchants calculating wages, poets scribbling verses by faint light, all bound together by something as humble as melting wax. The flame dips lower, sputters once, then steadies again, as if reluctant to go. You almost imagine it, whispering, "My work is done, but my memory remains." And as the final sliver of wax slides into stillness, you realize the candle has always been more than a clock. It's been a companion, a teacher, a quiet mirror of human life itself. And now, with your eyes heavy and your breath slowing, you let that image stay with you, the last glow of wax, a soft friend guiding you gently toward rest. And so, the flame softens, and the story with it. You let the echoes of bells drift further away, until they're nothing more than ripples in a dream. The candle before you has burned itself into silence, its smoke curling like a ribbon, disappearing into the dark. There is no rush anymore, no need to count drips or hours. Time for tonight has loosened its grip. Your body feels heavier now, comfortably so, sinking into the mattress beneath you. The coolness of your sheets wraps around you like the cloister's stone walls, safe and still. The hum of your fan, or the quiet night sounds outside your window, replaces the chant of monks, steady and soothing. All of it merges into a lullaby. You don't need to name. Picture that last bit of wax hardening at the bottom of the dish, the final echo of its long journey. It doesn't burn anymore, but it has left warmth, memory, and a faint glow in your mind. That glow belongs to you. Now, you can carry it, or you can let it fade. It makes no demands. Your breathing slows. Each inhale is like drawing in the faint sweetness of beeswax. Each exhale, a release, like smoke drifting lazily upward. The flame story is finished, but yours continues in the quiet of sleep. So close your eyes, gently, without effort. Let the world of monks and candles slip behind you. Feel yourself moving into a softer, quieter place, where there are no clocks, no bells, no hours, just peace, unbroken and calm. The candle has gone out, night has settled, and you are safe. Good night.